everybody. Welcome to another edition of Southern Dirt Motorsports. I'm Steve Winstead, along with my co-hosts Mike Luna and Tommy Guy. And today we're coming from the Northfield Vineyards in Sparta, Tennessee. They're gracious enough to host us and get a chance to stop in here and check their products out. They've got neat selection of wines and a lot of neat stuff. Today we've got the pleasure of Mr. Randall Davis joining us today from Woodbury, Tennessee. I used to watch him race quite a bit down at Sparta Speedway. He drove number 17, and he was always a tough competitor. Randall, welcome to the program.
Proud to be here, and I'm really proud, super proud you guys are doing this.
Well, we're honored to do it.
You know, it brings back a whole lot of memories. Like this cushion here we're looking at. I think it's got the number you started with.
It did. I had to change numbers because it was either the paint job or the number one that put all of those cars on their top. So I changed numbers so I could keep them on their wheels, and I changed color schemes too, and that helped keep them on their wheels. And I finally got a color scheme that they didn't turn over no more. So that's the reason I switched numbers.
Well, now, how long did you use this helmet here? I've seen some of the black and white pictures,
I think it was about 6 years or so that I used that. And there's a good story behind that. I guess that's as close the event that happened with that as I ever came of getting really hurt. Could have got killed. I had a bad crash at Winchester Speedway. And it happened on July the 4th weekend in 1968, I believe it was. And it was everybody and his brother was there, and they were open wheel cars. And back then we were allowed to run without a flywheel, without a battery, used a magneto for ignition, and it was all engine, tires, and very little weight. But anyway, we got together. They just ran out of real estate. It was nobody's fault. Just about every car in that race that night was involved in it. There was one or two saw it in time to run out in the infield, but just about everybody was involved in it. That particular night, I took out some cross ties. That's what they had down the front straightaway. And I took the flagman stand out, and the car caught on fire. It landed on the track upside down, and I got out of it before anybody saw me get out of it, and they were trying to put it out thinking I was still in it. But I was out there tugging on their arm to let them know I was okay. That's the only time I ever got a scar out of my years of racing. It cut my arm. And I guess my biggest concern, I saw the flagman stand, and I was afraid that I had got into the bleachers and hurt somebody else. But as it turned out, I didn't. If you were to go to Winchester now, it's shut down, but they actually moved the flagman stand. It was where you went into number one turn. Now it's coming out of number 4. They figured that was a safer place.
Yeah.
And if they were running it, like I say, it's shut down. It used to be one of my favorite tracks. But it's got a concrete wall down the front straight. After that night, they built that.
Yeah, I've spent a many Saturday nights there in Winchester and Enfield. So I noticed this picture here. Now, I've talked to the Lawrence. The funeral homes used to have these white wall tires, and they had to change them. Now, is this one, say, from a funeral home?
I really don't know where that came from. I just knew it worked, and I hoped it would last a long time. I used whatever would work. That just happened to work. I didn't realize it at the time because we were all learning what worked, what didn't, but it was a smaller diameter that made it work with a larger diameter on the right rear. So that's really, I don't know where it came from, but that's how come it was on there.
What was the year you started, Randall?
It was 1964, I think it was.
1964.
Yeah.
What year did you stop driving dirt?
I guess I had, in my later years, I had a mixture of dirt and asphalt. And,
Actually raced at Nashville.
yeah, I raced at Nashville parts of 2 seasons. I went down and raced some races just sporadically here and there. I got into the enduro racing for a while and raced down there on the short track, but I loved that big track down there. I'll never forget the first time I was on a paved track, and it was at the Fairground Speedway. When you turn the steering wheel, something actually happened. You adjust the car. You didn't have to adjust it much, and on dirt you had to go. A lot more turns to make something happen. The cars on asphalt are a lot more sensitive than they are on dirt. It was the best feeling in the world I ever had, just to be out there in the middle of the names that were being called out that I had gone and watched race. I was actually sitting in there among those guys, and it was one of the best feelings in the world to do that.
You won several races all throughout the years. I remember, lots of times at Sparta you would win. Do you know how many championships you won, Randall?
I think I actually just won one championship. I've had some bad years, but I've had some really good years. But I think I only won one championship and got second in another one.
Did you ever wreck really bad besides that coupe? Is that the only time?
That was the most spectacular wreck I had. I had one at the fairground. I got hit hard enough that I couldn't see for a few minutes. It didn't hurt me. Just a few minutes later, but it did knock me out. But for a few minutes, I couldn't see. It was an odd feeling. It's one of them where you shake your heads and rub your eyes and you ain't sure what just happened. But I've been lucky enough. Through my years of racing, I never broke a bone, and I've only got one scar out of it. I've had contusions. They describe that, and I hope I get it right, where you hit hard enough it'll pull the meat off the bones. but I never broke any of them.
I see right here. You're an aerospace engineer. Did any of
I was an engineer. I worked at an aerospace company. I was actually a machinist by trade.
Oh, okay.
I got to make the parts for a lot of our famous airplanes. The first one that I worked on, it was the C-141 transport plane for the Air Force. I guess the second one was the C-5A, and all of the space shuttles, if you've watched them in space and the cargo bay open, they had a bulkhead that was right behind where the pilots sit, and I did machine work on all of those, and the big orange fuel tanks that they would drop off after a space shot, I did work on all of those too. And during Vietnam, we made the cab and tail booms for the Huey helicopters. And if you ever watch the show Criminal Minds, that airplane that they fly on is a 550 Grumman airplane, and we build the wings for those at work. So,
wow.
So that's some of the ones I've done, the big C-130s that you used to see fly around the 4-engine. Mm-hmm. Job. We did the tail sections for those, so that was a line of work I was in.
When did you first start thinking about aero in race cars? That would have probably been earlier than most people.
Well, I used to see how the air was coming over a car. I didn't, when you're going down the road and you have your hand stuck out the window and you move your hand up and down and push back. I used to be out there, and I guess the guy behind me thought I was waving at him or something. But you could raise your hand up a little bit, and you could tell if the air was coming through the car or where it was going over it. And the ironic thing was, I found the faster I went, the less air was coming through the car. So I started playing around with that a little bit and bending here and there to make things a little better.
Aerodynamics.
Yeah.
So you was way ahead of your time right there, Randall.
Yeah.
It was I didn't know what I was doing, but I I was experimenting a lot.
Well, if it's helping you, that was good.
But a lot of people didn't think about air in that day.
It was, I just enjoyed every aspect of a race car. I did my own building. I built my own engines, and the only car I ever got hurt in, I didn't build it, but I learned. I learned a lot from it, and that's the way we learned the safety things in cars as they evolved. I look back at Roy's cars that he's restored and saving. I'm proud he is. How little safety features we had. A driving suit was a clean T-shirt that didn't have a lot of gas and oil in it. So that was our safety equipment that we had, and very few roll bars in it. I've seen some guys do some really dumb stuff over the years when they started making us use roll bars. I'll tell this, and it's almost unbelievable, it's true. If you remember the old tablecloths that you used to get that come in a cardboard type roll, I saw a guy tape those together and put in a car for his roll cage. And it looked good. He had it wrapped in foam and stuff, but it was cardboard. So it really looked good. I saw a guy at Burgess Falls once when we had to have a helmet, and I'll never forget this. It was a pot like you'd cook beans in, but it was shiny. Now that's how long I've been in this.
Was there some of them guys back then that didn't wear a helmet, Randall?
They made us wear some kind of helmet, but at first it just really wasn't. It just had to be something over your head, I think. I know my first helmet was it was either a bicycle or a motorcycle helmet. I'm not sure which one it was, but after a few knocks, I got a real helmet. I thought,
Your head was worth
you
more.
get skin up doing this.
Now, getting back to a while ago, you said you run second in a championship. Is that the one that they kind of cut the season short when Gene Wood got hurt?
Yes, it was, and that was the right thing to do.
I was remembering that, you didn't want to win the championship without him being out there. And, they decided to cut the season short on points. And I always really appreciate you doing that, Randall.
Well, just I drove that car that Gene got hurt in about 2 weeks or so before he got hurt in it. I used to drive a little for Houston, too. Enjoyed driving for him. He had some of the better cars out there, and I really enjoyed driving for Houston when I could. Considered driving for him full time at once, thought better of it, wanted to keep doing it myself.
Do your own thing.
Do my own thing.
That right there, though, just shows what kind of person Randall is. I mean, he's top notch, and always has been. And that's a big deal, guy that could won a championship and then didn't.
Well, we took our racing serious, but we thought a lot of each other. There was lots of pranks that we would do sometimes. I can tell you this little story that involved Earl Lawrence. Earl was always, and if he was alive today, still would be one of my heroes. Earl worked at Standard Auto Parts, and he ran a crankshaft machine, and he would build, this was in the flathead Ford days now, and he would build you a top-notch engine for about $500. And another good friend of mine, Don Hobbs, had Earl to build him an engine. And at that time, at Sparta Speedway, it was the first old track. It was not the last one. It was
one behind the school.
Yeah, the first one. We could overbore 60,000. Well, Earl knew that Don would probably win with it eventually. He knew he'd get protested with it. So, and the engine was a 60 over, but on one side of it, on the right-hand bank, Earl stamped it 80 over. Sure enough, Don won the race, and sure enough, he got protested. And there it was. He knew that he would take the right-hand bank off, the right hand from the driver's seat, because it was easier to get to. And there it was, 80 over. Well, Don knew that he had paid for a 60 over engine, but they measured it. The guy that measured it said it's 60. It's not 80. And they was about to kill each other over who was right on this. Earl had took off. He knew what was going to happen, so he took off immediately after the race. Got home. They called him, and he didn't even go to bed. He knew he was going to get the call. And I wanted to know, what is that engine? It's checking 60, but it's stamped 80. And he said, if you take the other side off, it'll be 60. That's really what it is. So he had done that for a prank. This went on forever. And that was one of the funnier stories that I've remembered over the years back in the Flathead Ford days.
And you always had Mr. Magoo on your car that I remember. What about it?
That was another sense of humor thing. For years, I wore glasses, and up until I had LASIK surgery, I wore glasses from the time I was a teenager, and that just fit what I thought I was pretty good. Some things I could see, some things I didn't. I tried to dodge the ones that I saw too late, and it was just something that I liked. I liked the Mr. Magoo character real well, so I rode him on my trunk lid for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm. And that stuck in my mind to when I was young. There was two cars, that Randall's with Mr. Magoo and then Pepper's with the Snoopy, and both of them always kind of stuck in my mind.
I remember them both.
Pepper, I can tell you this story. Pepper and I were teenagers together. His name's Earl, by the way, too. But my first automobile that I ever owned was a '58 Ford convertible. Earl had one exactly like it. I mean, it was a convertible, the same color. You couldn't tell them apart. Anything that I did wrong that my dad heard about, I blamed it on Earl, and I'm sure Earl did the same thing with, or Pepper, I should say. People will know him as Pepper. I blamed it on Pepper when I could.
Randall, what was the most money you'd won in a night racing?
I would guess, for the most part, I don't know how they wound up doing in the end. Whatever the gate took in, that was split halfway between whoever was the competitors, and it depended on that. I guess maybe $1,000, $1,200 was
which that's pretty good money, wouldn't it?
It was
back then.
And back when I started racing and on into it a good ways, that was the place to be. The racetrack was where the neighbors were on Saturday night. Every little community out there had their guy. And it wasn't unusual at all for people in the neighborhood to stop by and see if you were running good, if there was anything wrong. They'd even go make side bets on you if everything was okay. And I'd tell them, you better bet against me tonight if something's wrong. And I hated to do that. I stopped doing that because I'd get it fixed sometimes. And sometimes it got worse, but I'd get it fixed sometimes. But they would actually do that.
You guys was heroes to me, and then probably back then the whole county looked at you like that pretty much because you guys was famous, really.
Yeah, I didn't. I never really had a real sponsor, but it was sort of a joke. I was friends with the owner of the local funeral home. He said, if things go really bad for you one night, I'll take care of you.
Back when you was running, what was the average cost to build a car to get it on track?
For me, not that much. Probably, I'm going to guess $3,000. Well, it was less than that in the Flathead Ford days. But even when we started running late models, $3,000 would build a pretty decent car.
Well, now what about when you stepped up to the Vega?
Things were starting to get more and more expensive along there.
Did you have a big block engine in that Nashville car?
No, we were limited to 355 cubic inches, or a 30 over 350.
Did it have aluminum heads or?
No, we had to. At the point that I was doing it, you could port your heads any way you wanted, but they had to start with a stock production casting. It could be the highest performance casting that Chevy made, which they usually would put in a Corvette at the time. Or they would have some aftermarket that you could buy and install yourself. You was allowed to do that. But most Chevrolet performance heads had the 2020 intake valves on them back then, and that's what they allowed down there.
I know probably, I guess I would be probably in my maybe early, not even early teens. They run big blocks for a while, didn't they, Randall, there at Nashville?
Yes, they did. The things with the big blocks, the reason they didn't stay real popular, they put a lot of weight on the front end, and they had a heavier rotate mass too for that length of track. And you backed off of it, but it was that split millisecond that it had that forward surge to it. They didn't handle as good as a small block, and with a little bit of fudging here and there, you could do with a small block what you could do with a big block just about anyway.
What was the worst accident you'd seen, Randall, at a racetrack?
I saw Billy McRae get killed at Nashville, and I never drove a figure-8 car, but Billy was driving a figure-8 car, and that night he wasn't driving his car. He was driving another guy's car, but nobody knew Billy was driving it. And the car that he was driving, the guy that drove it, he wasn't as brave as Billy. He was bad about slowing up or stopping in the cross, and Billy wouldn't stop, and he didn't. And he got hit real hard that night, and the flagman stood on a big concrete embutment so he could flag better in a figure-8 deal. And Billy hit that. He hit it so hard it shoved the engine back up in the cockpit where he was sitting, and it killed him right there. He was the last one that I guess I saw get killed. I've seen 2 others in my lifetime.
At the racetrack?
Yep. It's a sobering thought, but you don't dwell on it. You get in and you go again.
That's just part of the danger, part of the sport.
I think everybody realizes that can happen, but it can happen going home tonight too. Yeah. So I always believed you've got a number. Till that number rolls up, you're going to be okay. Anyway, my dad used to tell me he thought I was rushing it a little bit, but that was a philosophy that I used throughout life anyway with it, and still do.
I know one of them was probably at Sparta you was talking about. Where would the other one be that you saw killed at a racetrack, Randall?
I'm trying to think. It was in Alabama, but I forgot which track it was. Both of the other ones were in Alabama. And I know I used to race at Decatur. I used to race at Muscle Shoals. It was probably one of those. I raced at Scottsville, Kentucky some, and I think that might have been a place that Gene Slaggard was talking about. They like to fight more than they like to race up there. I think I raced up there twice and figured I didn't want to be a fighter. I wanted to be a racer, so those couple of times was all I needed there.
Now, this car or picture I'm looking at, did you get that from somebody?
No, I actually built that one too. That was a 56 Chevrolet, and I actually built that, and I bent all the tubing myself with a torch and wrapped it around a wheel or whatever I had to wrap it around to bend it. And that car was pretty heavy, but it was a pretty decent old car.
Well, I noticed part of it looked like a number. Might have been 77 been put on there, but it looked like taped over it to get your 17.
It was a 77 at once, and I put it on there with tape. There was 2 other guys showed up with that number up Sparta one night. And to keep from a big argument over it, I said I'll be 77 tonight. So that's how come that looks like that.
Okay.
Was there, we talked about you starting out with 16. Was there a reason you chose number 16, Randall?
I bought that car. I happen to think I did buy that, and I had to do a lot to it. But the guy that was going to race the car, was going to use that number 16, and that's why I just went ahead with it. I didn't have a number picked out or a particular reason for a certain number, but I went ahead and used that number.
The 17 is all I ever knowed you was with, ever.
I didn't, just about as soon as we went to the bigger cars, the closed cars with fenders on them, I started using the 17 then. And like I say, every red car that had 16 on it got on its top somehow. and I honestly did tell my dad, I said, it's got to be the paint or the number. One or the two of them's doing this. It ain't me, but it was a joke between me and him.
Did your dad like the races a lot?
He really did. He after I had that particularly bad wreck at Winchester, he backed off a little bit, but he started coming back again.
Did he race, or was you a first generation?
I was a first generation in the family to do it. Most of my cousins, and I didn't have any brothers, had one sister, but they all went in different directions. It was just the way my race story started was one of my aunts was in the hospital and had a baby, and the guys, we went and visited the new baby, and somebody mentioned that they had just built a racetrack in McMinnville, and it was in the fall. They wanted to run a couple races on it to get it ready for the following year. It was 1959. I was 14 years old. They took me to that race. I can till this day, smell it, hear it, feel it, the vibrations and stuff. And I told my dad, that's what I'm going to do. He didn't believe it. But every time I could con somebody into taking me to the racetrack, from that day on, I went. When I couldn't con anybody into it, I drove myself. I didn't have any driver's license, but I did it. I got there some way. So that's how my racing story started.
Well, Randall, we appreciate you coming and visiting with us. Like for you to come back sometime?
I'd like to. The pleasure's been mine. There's all kinds of stories out there.
Yeah, I know one we didn't get to. You building an engine in your living room.
Yes, I do. That'll be a story at some time when you've got time for it. But having a good wife, a supportive wife, that happened. And at the time, my garage was a truck tailgate and a gravel spot in the yard.
Well, that's all for this episode. I'm Steve Winstead along with my co-host, Tommy Guy and Mike Luna. Thank you, Randall, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate Northfield Vineyard for hosting us today. And if you got any questions or comments or suggestions, please email us at southerndirtmotorsports@gmail.com. We'll see you again.